Okay, let's talk about reselling, the pros, the cons, the truth I just feel like aren't talked about enough. Hopefully you've got your coffee, your tea, your water. Maybe you're working in the background, listing, photographing, sending offers, whatever it may be. If you are, you go. It's night, it's like 11:30 and my 2-month-old daughter is sleeping. So this is when I have time to make this video. I've got tea. So let's dive into it. I'm going to talk about a pro of reselling and then a con of reselling, kind of just go back and forth. But before I do, just want to do a quick preface. I am a full-time reseller. I'm a reselling business owner. I've been reselling for about 6 years now. I've been full-time for about 4 years now, and I focus primarily on women's clothing. I have sourced inventory every way I can think of. I've done retail arbitrage, online arbitrage, liquidation, thrifting, Goodwill bins, outlets, regular Goodwills, regular mom and pop thrift stores. I've tried everything, and I've recently changed my business model, and I talked about that in a video that I'll link up on the screen, where now I am very much primarily just sourcing at the Goodwill bins, and I'm focusing mainly on pre-owned clothing. So I just wanted to say that before I talk about the pros and cons, because reselling can be a million different things. There's a million different categories and ways to go about reselling. So that's what I do, and that's what I'm going to be talking about in this video. Okay, so I actually want to start this video by talking about the business side of things. So really thinking about reselling from an entrepreneurial perspective. Say you wanted to start a business and you weren't sure what kind of business you wanted to start. That's really kind of the lens I'm looking at reselling for the first pro and the first con. Because I went to business school, I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I come from an entrepreneurial family, and it's kind of just how I've approached reselling and how I think about it some of the time. And then we'll talk about more just kind of the nitty-gritty of what it means to be a reseller and the pros and cons of that, because that's kind of more the day-to-day stuff that affects you very much on a very visceral level. So pro number one, when people ask me like, what is your favorite thing about reselling, this is always what I say. And it's that it is, I think, potentially the best type of business to start when you want to learn how to start a business and want to learn how to run a business. And that's really why I gravitated towards reselling, because I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I had never started or run a business before, and reselling has the lowest barriers to entry, more so than basically any other business you can start, because you can just grab things that you already own and you can sell them. You don't have to invest any money whatsoever. You don't have to have any really business acumen. You just really have to have a phone, like a smartphone, and some things that you no longer want that have some resale value. And then you can reinvest that money into new inventory. There's just such low overhead, such low risk, such low barriers to entry. You can really mess up over and over again and learn from those mistakes. You can learn as you go. You can learn through trial and error. It's just a really great way to learn about so many different fundamental things about business, from bookkeeping and accounting to marketing to risk assessment and market trends. And eventually, I now, and I should have prefaced this in the beginning, I now have an employees, I have an office space, so I've learned a lot about, management and things, and systemization and operations and things like that, and HR. Like I am the HR department, and I've just learned so many things. I've made a lot of mistakes, and the cost of making those mistakes have been so much lower than they would have been in other just more capital intensive or higher risk business models or industries. So I'm really grateful for reselling for that. I learned basically how to start and run a business in my 20s, and I can have that and leverage that, throughout my lifetime. Okay, so next, con number two, and this is that reselling doesn't get easier. And this is from a business model perspective. And really what I mean by this is that reselling is hard to scale compared to other business models, and there are virtually no economies of scale. So what I mean by that is, if you haven't heard of the term economies of scale, a classic example is construction. So a lot of times construction companies will make much more money building out a whole subdivision versus just one house, not only because they're selling more houses, but also because of economies of scale. Their cost of lumber or concrete or just the materials are going to go down per unit if they buy in bulk. Similarly, they'll have more negotiating leverage with subcontractors. So their electricians that they subcontract out will be cheaper per house if they have these massive contracts. That is what I mean by economies of scale. And in reselling, there are virtually no economies of scale, meaning that whether you're buying like 10 items or 1,000 items at the thrift store, your cost of goods, your average cost of goods is going to basically stay the same. Goodwill is not going to reward you for being a loyal and a steady customer. Unfortunately, there is, the slight economies of scale. For instance, at my Goodwill, if you buy more than 25 pounds, then it's cheaper, but that's pretty easy to hit, and then there's nothing really beyond that. So in some industries, the bigger you get, the easier and cheaper it becomes, the more productive it becomes. In reselling, that's not the case. This isn't only the case with your cost of goods, but it's also the case when it comes to your listing or processing of items. Reselling is really labor intensive. And the way I like to think about it is retail versus resale. So think of Anthropologie. They have one listing and they devote X amount of labor hours to that listing. So they have to hire a buyer to go find a designer and buy that item, or they have to design it in-house. They have to hire a model and they have to photograph that item on the model. However many X amount of hours into that single listing goes into it. However, that listing, they have hundreds or thousands of units of that single listing that can really support all of that labor and can provide a really good return on investment. Whereas reselling, you have one unit. You still have to source, you still have to steam, photograph, inventory, ship that item, but you only have one unit. And so it's just a very, very labor intensive industry, and labor's not cheap. And your labor's not cheap. Even if you're just a solopreneur, your time is valuable. And in the beginning, you are going to increase efficiency as you build up your experience, as you systematize, but that happens fairly quickly, maybe 1-2 years in. And then after that, it really plateaus and it's just very, very still labor intensive, and there's no economies of scale of productivity. This is why I think a lot of companies have tried to have reselling business models within them. I know Nordstrom tried like 1 or 2 years ago. They were selling, I think, their returned inventory, and I know other companies have done it as well. And a lot of times they just give up because it is just so labor intensive and so expensive to just list one item. And it can really wear on you and become exhausting if you are the one person in your business doing it all. I wanted to include this as con number 1 because it's just something that I don't hear people talk about very much. And in so many businesses, in so many industries, the bigger you grow, the bigger you scale, at least some aspects become easier, or you can just leverage your scale in order to make certain aspects cheaper, more productive, etc. But in reselling, that's really not the case, at least in my experience, and I have a hard time fathoming in what way it would be easier, because it's just very, very difficult to scale just because of the inherent nature of what reselling is. Each unit requires a lot of labor and there's just not a lot of economies of scale, and for those reasons it's just really, really difficult to scale, and there's just no real advantage to scaling other than making more money. But in fact, a lot of things kind of become more difficult and you have more headaches. So I'd be interested if you disagree with me. If you have had a different experience, comment down below. But yeah, that is a really big disadvantage. And just the longer I resell, the bigger my business gets, the more that really, really wears on me. So that's con number 1. Let's move on to pro number 2. And this is a really big advantage of reselling, and that is that there's no ceiling to your earnings. I have been watching a lot of weird genres on YouTube recently, and one of the rabbit holes I've fallen down is budgeting. And there are videos in which people will budget out their paycheck. And for whatever reason, watching those videos just dawned on me so clearly that a lot of people have to very scrupulously, meticulously plan out how they're going to spend their money, because there's no way for them to increase the amount of money that they're earning. And that's what obviously entrepreneurship gives you the ability to do, is that there's no ceiling to your paycheck. Essentially, you can make more the next week than you did last week. And I think for people who are motivated by that, like I am, that's really enticing and really exciting and helps you really get out of bed in the morning. I think it would be really hard if I knew like I was just gonna make X amount for the rest of my life and maybe get one promotion a year or one raise a year, and that was it, and that was really all the opportunity I had to make more money. Being an entrepreneur, being a reseller, it allows me to work more and make more money. But that's also con number 2, is that how much you make is directly tied to how much you work. If you work less, you make less money. If you take time off, you make less money. If you are inconsistent with the amount you're working, your paycheck or how much you're making is going to be really inconsistent. It just really weighs on you, especially when you're going through things like maternity leave, or you're sick, or you have mental health issues, or whatever it may be. Like, having that pressure of like, if I take time away, I'm just not going to make money, can be somewhat debilitating at times. And so there's two sides of this coin. I mean, when things are going well in your life and you can really pull yourself up by your bootstraps and work, you really feel the benefits of that work in a meaningful way, like in your bank account. Sometimes it can be delayed, but it's still, you see the fruits of your labor. And for people who like to work like I do, that's awesome. It really keeps me coming back. But at the same time, if you don't want to be working 24/7, or you need to take time away from your business for whatever reason, you're just gonna feel that in a really meaningful way as well. Okay, and this leads me into pro number 3, and this is very much tied to what I was saying earlier, but reselling is not a 9-to-5 job. That's obvious, but this is maybe one of the biggest reasons I've never quit reselling, and it's not because of what reselling is, but it's because of what reselling's not. And that is, I don't have to get up early, like put on stuffy clothes, get into my car when it's like cold in the morning, get into traffic, go into a stuffy office, have coworkers I don't like, have a boss I don't like, have office politics, like all of that stuff. When I think about the alternative of going into an office and having a corporate job, I suddenly become a lot more grateful for reselling. And I have friends, because I went to business school, who have climbed the corporate ladder and make a lot of money and make more money than I do. But when I think about what they have to do to make that money, I'm like, I just have no envy for that situation whatsoever. So that's really a pro. And I think it's good to know yourself and know what you like, because there are people who do like going to the office and having coworkers and having that kind of stable work environment. And if that's you, then you're probably not going to want to have reselling as your full-time job, because it's very much not that. But for those of us who hate that, I think reselling is an amazing opportunity. But that leads me to con number 3, and that instead of a 9-to-5 job, reselling is instead a 5-to-9 job. And I was joking with my reselling friend about this, that we traded our 9-to-5 jobs for 5-to-9 jobs. And for me anyways, reselling isn't like I'm working all waking hours of the day, but I'm at least on, like when it comes to work, all hours of the day. Like I'm checking my email, I'm checking offers, I'm sending offers, I'm answering questions, I'm available to my customers and to my business and to my employees when they're working, but I'm available all hours of the day. And even I remember after I gave birth, I was like laying in the hospital bed, I couldn't sleep, and I was just on my phone, like sending offers and answering questions. So that's just the life of reseller. It's kind of all encompassing in a lot of ways. And the other part of that, it's 5-to-9, but it's also a job. And I think when you are a hobby reseller or you're just starting in reselling, reselling can be really fun, exciting, and even addictive. And it can oftentimes not feel like work, but once you do it full time, or you're deep into your reselling career, or you just rely on it for income in any like substantial way, then it really starts to become monotonous, tedious, boring. Even the aspects that are exciting, like sourcing, can just become a grind. And there are days where I just don't want to go sourcing, but I have to force myself to do it. It's just a lot of work, and it's not passive income, because when you do make a sale, you've already logged those hours, you've logged that labor, and you've spent that money to acquire that item. That payoff for those hours of money spent is just delayed. It's not passive. And similarly, you're not making money while you sleep because you've already logged those hours. It's just, again, delayed. And I hear those two being tossed around in the community or like on Instagram all the time. And it's just erroneous, because there's nothing passive about reselling. It's very active. It's very laborious and exhausting. Okay, on to pro number 4, and that is the flexibility. I really appreciate this being a new mom. The fact that I can work at midnight while she sleeps, the fact that I can work when she goes down for a nap, which is very, at this point in her life, inconsistent. So I can be available to her when I need to be, and I can work when I need to be. I can't imagine having to go into an office job right now. Like, that would, I don't know, I couldn't do it. So I really appreciate the flexibility, being able to choose my own hours. And yes, I'm available on my phone all the time, but in terms of actively listing or actively doing the reselling work, I get to kind of choose when I do that. And I can take naps if I need to. I can take a day off if I need to. I don't have to ask for anyone's permission. I get to set my vacation time and so forth. I can even work on vacation. I can travel, work at the same time. I like that a lot. But that leads me to con number 4, and it is that while reselling does have flexibility, has freedom, which is really important, it also has inconsistency, unpredictability, and instability. And I actually think and believe in the power of a business model when it comes to reselling, in that if you are really consistent with the type of inventory that you are selling over time, you're consistent with your average cost of goods, your average sales price, and your sell-through rate remains similar over time. If you do that consistently over time and you're listing the same amount each week, you can create essentially a formula for your business where you can predict with some level of assurance that you're going to make this much if you list this much. So I actually do think if you know your numbers and you are consistent, it's not a complete roller coaster. However, that being said, there's a lot of variables that can go wrong when it comes to reselling, and it's not always that simple. You know, there are things that can happen in your life that make your listing more inconsistent, or you go to the thrift store and you just have a really dry week and you realize, oh my gosh, this is going to affect the amount I'm going to be able to list this month, and that's going to affect the amount I make this month. And that can really just hang over your head when you rely on reselling for your income. Or you can just have like 3 days in a row where there are slow sales and you know how much you need to make each day in sales, and you're just checking your phone over and over and over, and you're like, what is going on? And that is just can really weigh on you. And like I said, you know, the flexibility is something that I've really gained a newfound appreciation for when entering motherhood. But the instability and the inconsistency and unpredictability is something that has also definitely been highlighted within motherhood as well, because I need to be able to provide not only for myself and my partner, but also for our child. And so having this business that is inherently a little bit unstable, like, you know, most businesses are, but owning a business and having to carry the weight of that unpredictability can be very draining and can definitely be a disadvantage at times. Okay, so finally, the last pro and con. And this is really a pro for me. I don't know if it's a pro for everyone, but for me, I really like the ability to work by myself. I am an extreme introvert. I really need alone time. I really like alone time. I like just plugging in, listening to a podcast, listening to music, listening to a book, in working entirely by myself. Even when I worked at companies, I really preferred roles in which I could kind of just work by myself, and this job gives me the ability to do that. It's not that I don't like people, I love people, but I just really need a lot of alone time. And reselling definitely gives you a lot of alone time, which is also con number 5, in that it gets lonely. And I think that's why there's such an amazing online community of resellers, but it's because reselling, especially when you do it full time, just becomes really isolating, and you don't have coworkers and you don't have people to just shoot ideas off of or ask for a second opinion or just talk and be able to laugh at different situations or scenarios or customers or what have you. It's just everything you're doing is by yourself, and that, you know, especially depending on your personalities, it really can be a huge factor in whether or not reselling is right for you. Because for people who are extroverted and need to be connecting with other humans on a regular basis, reselling is going to be pretty hard. And there are workarounds around that. Like, you can definitely find reselling friends in your area. You can definitely be very engaged online in this amazing community. But at the same time, especially when you're just carrying the weight of the business by yourself and something goes wrong, you're having a bad week or whatever it may be, it can just be very, very heavy and isolating and lonely. So that is the final pro and con. I don't really want to end the video there. I will just end it, you know, the last pro is what I was talking about earlier. Y'all, I mean, I don't think there's a better online community like that exists, period. I think the reselling community is just amazing. There's so much support, there's so much positivity. There are meetups, there are conferences, just DMing people on Instagram. There are a lot of ways to make friends within this reselling community, and there's just a lot of really cool, interesting people in this community, and I just feel really grateful to be a part of it. So let me know in the comments down below what pro, con, disadvantage, advantage, what truth about reselling do you think is overlooked or just not talked about? I'm really curious. I have been wanting to do this video for a long time. This is my truth about reselling. I think for everyone it's different, but this is definitely some pros and cons that have been weighing on me and have been top of mind for me a lot recently. So anyways, thank y'all so much for watching. If you haven't already, be sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe. All right, I'll see y'all in the next one. Thanks. Love y'all so much. Bye.